Okay, everybody, let's get started and to talk about what personality is. What is personality, and specifically, what is personality from the perspective of a psychological scientist? So we're going to talk about what is personality psychology. Basically, when we think about personality, there's everyday meaning to it. People know what personality is. Characterize, we think about, Joe's personality. Joe has a good personality, for example. So we're thinking about it as unique to each individual. And as we'll talk about how psychologists study personality, really, psychologists look at personality as a construct, which is another word for saying it's a concept. And this concept, it's an abstract concept that could actually be applicable to all people. So yeah, Joe has a unique personality, but there are aspects about Joe's personality that Mary and Lisa and Fred all share, that we all share. So there are certain aspects of personality that we as human beings all share, and that the study of what personality is from that perspective, that's what we're talking about, a construct. Realize, however, there are a number of different ways in which scientists can look at personality, and there really isn't any universally agreed upon definition. But what we're going to be talking about in this course, we're going to see that we're going to be looking at personality from multiple perspectives within the field of psychology. Many different ways of studying personality, thinking about personality, researching personality, and so on. Okay, so let's talk about what this personality construct is, this concept of what is personality. Okay? One of the things to consider when you're thinking about how to define personality, you should think about it in terms of having consistency or continuity across time and across situations. Meaning that if we're talking about personality to describe a person or to describe several people, we are assuming that a person's personality does not just change hour by hour. This is something that you carry with you for an extended period of time throughout your life. Furthermore, it's something that you can express in multiple situations. Another thing to consider when we're talking about the construct of personality is this is coming from within us. Each person has his or her own personality, and this personality essentially affects how we think, how we feel, and how we act. Okay? Now realize that we don't live in isolated bubbles. We interact with other people. We encounter many, many different situations. So clearly, if we're going to say that your personality, your behavior and everything you do is all because of your personality, that's pretty silly, actually. We are tremendously affected by the situations we encounter. This actually is the the debate between personality psychologists and social psychologists, in that how much of our personality is due to the situation that we're in, and how much of our personality is due to, how much of our behavior rather is due to the person that we are, our personality. So in other words, who we are obviously has an impact on the things that we do, but also the situations that we encounter also impact the things that we do, our behavior. So in this course, really, we're focusing more on the aspects of the person, the personality. If we're taking a course in social psychology, it would focus more on the situational determinants of behavior. Another very important use of the personality construct is it helps us predict and understand behavior. Okay, people do all sorts of strange, unusual things, but they also do a lot of interesting, just the normal everyday things that we do. And we can a good concept of personality actually would help us be able to predict what a person might do in a particular situation and understand why people are behaving the way they are. So in other words, when we're looking at and trying to understand why people do the things that they do, it's important for us to think about personality, the personality construct, helping us to kind of understand what's going on. Another aspect of the personality construct is the idea that each person is unique, each person is distinct, and each person has his or her own personality. And it's a matter of the combination of the various characteristics that you may have that essentially color who you are as a person. So it's your particular combination of factors, biological, psychological, and so on, that kind of decide, that figure out who you are inside. And the personality construct essentially, that's part of what that personality construct really is. So if you put all this together, if you want to kind of define personality, define this construct. Well, Gordon Allport in 1961, Gordon Allport was a very influential personality psychologist, and he came up with a pretty good definition. Some people would disagree. It's not a perfect definition. It's something that we can work with for now, which I think covers a lot of useful points. So let's talk about this. Personality is a dynamic organization inside the person of psychophysical systems that create the person's characteristic patterns of behavior, thoughts, and feelings. So what I want to do now is let's break down this definition a bit. Okay. First of all, the idea that personality has an organized structure. In other words, it's not just haphazard stuff going on. It's not just thoughts flying in and out of our heads. Our personality has a structure to it. It's coherent. And I think when we think about ourselves and our personality, we think of ourselves in that way. We know ourselves. And then again, that's the assumption is that there's some kind of a structure to each person's personality. It involves active processes. It's not just some static. It's not just like a. In other words, if we're talking about someone's personality, we're not just talking about a painting. Let's say we're talking about the processes that are going on within that person that say something about who this person is and how they will react to certain situations and how they will act, how they will behave. The psychophysical components of in that definition, the psychophysical systems, indicates a combination of psychological and physical components. In other words, there is both biology involved in terms of how our personality works, as well as psychological aspects. What we've learned, how we process information in our brain. All of that, the psychological and the physical, biological combined to put together our definition of personality. The personality, again, helps determine how we relate to the world. Again, we don't live in bubbles, so we're not isolated. We interact with other people. We react to situations, and we act on situations, create situations ourselves. But our personality, as we define it here, determines exactly how people relate to the world. Some of you are going to relate differently to this class than others will. So each person is going to relate to the world in a different way. Another aspect of this definition is that personality demonstrates patterns and consistency. So patterns, when we're looking at an individual's personality, we kind of see that it reflects patterns in terms of how they typically deal with situations, how they typically influence our behavior. And again, it has to do with consistency in terms of over time and across situations. Finally, if we're talking about personality, now realize something here. So stop here for a second here. Personality is not something you can actually see or touch. It is something that we seem to recognize that it exists, but it's really not something that you can directly observe. You can't take someone's personality and put it in a jar and measure it. Personality is something that is within us. We don't necessarily have a clear way of accurately defining what exactly it is, or at least not observable anyway. But nevertheless, we can infer that personality exists based on the various thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that we engage in and that people engage in. So in other words, we can see someone's patterns of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and from that get a sense of what that person's personality is. Okay. Two basic themes that we can talk about in this class, and you'll see various examples of it throughout the different perspectives, is that one thing is focusing on individual differences. We recognize that there are differences in people, and that people are different from other people, but nevertheless you can study how people differ on those qualities. For example, aggressiveness, sociability, and optimism. All those are aspects of personality, and everybody differs in some way on those characteristics. Thus, the study of individual differences. Another area of study in personality is intrapersonal functioning, saying what is underneath, what underlies our personality. Certainly when we get to Freud, we'll be talking about what are the internal thought processes going on that underlie the things that we do. But also you look at biological factors playing a role in determining how we behave. We can talk about goals and motivations as driving us, as guiding our behaviors. So you could look at how people differ on common characteristics, and you could also look at how individuals function based on what is going on within that person. Okay. Personality psychology, as well as any other science really, relies on theories. Okay. So when you've heard people say, oh, well, that's just a theory, that's not really true. That's a very simplistic way of looking at a theory. Theories are extremely important. What theories do is they help us understand the world around us. Without theories, basically, everything that we see, everything that we do, would all be basically random. We wouldn't be able to understand why anybody does what they do, why the world works the way it does. So theories essentially the purpose of theories is essentially to explain all the different things that we see and hear around us. To try to put it into a perspective that we can understand, that makes sense. And theory is also, so theory applies to all the different sciences, biology, chemistry, physics, again, ways of understanding how the world works. With personality psychology, again, the function is pretty much the same. We want to explain what is known. Okay, and there are many different theories that we will be discussing in this class. And these theories are used to essentially explain why we do the things that we do. Social learning theory, for example, is a very highly respected and very often studied theory that helps explain a lot of behaviors. For example, it can be used to help explain differences in aggressiveness. Okay, so for example, we could talk about a child who perhaps grew up in an abusive household and saw his or her parents, you know, basically engaging in physical abuse to each other, and maybe being physically abused themselves. Then essentially they learn essentially from their observations, from what they see, and they act it out in outside of the home essentially, and they can become aggressive themselves. Okay. So in other words, understanding social learning theory, how we model other people's behavior, essentially helps us understand specific behaviors like aggressiveness, as well as many other behaviors that we do, can be explained through social learning theory. And that's an important theory in the study of personality. Another very useful aspect of theories is that what they're supposed to do essentially is they're supposed to help us predict new information. We want to be able to not just explain the behavior that we see and observe, but also be able to predict behaviors that follow, especially if we wanted to do some kind of an intervention, whether it involves therapy, whether it involves a new kind of teaching technique, whatever it happens to be. We want to be able to predict, well, if we do this, then this will happen. And theory and personality helps explain what people do and why they do it, and be able to also predict when if this happens, then this will happen. So for example, biological theories of personality, which is one of the perspectives we'll get to, they might predict exactly why there are similarities in behaviors of parents and children. So in other words, if we can examine characteristics of the parents, we could then predict what their children are going to be like as they become adults. Theory by itself is not going to be very useful, because you could sit in a chair and make up a theory and be able to try to use your own explanations for why you think the world is the way it is. And a lot of people do sit there and watch TV and make up their own theories for why people are the way they are, grumbling at the news and so on. But really, if we wanted to establish the accuracy of a theory, how well does a theory explain behavior? How well does it predict behavior? Well, then we need to be able to conduct research. The good thing is a theory tells us where to go with our research. In other words, it guides our research. Without any theory, we wouldn't necessarily know what to study and how to study it. Theory kind of gives us a roadmap for how we can conduct research. Once we then conduct research, the research results tell us what we found from our study, and now we can then draw conclusions from it. And you might find in your conclusions that your theory was supported. Maybe you find that the research did in fact support your theory as you predicted. Or you might find that the research maybe didn't do such a great job of supporting your theory, and maybe your theory needs to be changed. And this is a never-ending process. As we find that maybe theories need to be changed, we then have to conduct more research, and the process continues over and over. Realize that there are good theories and there are not so good theories. All theories are not equal. And, well, everyone has a right to an opinion, let's say. An opinion that is not very well supported by evidence is not of much use. When we're talking about a theory that is not supported by evidence, well, what really good is that? If your theory can't explain things, or if the explanations are all wrong, what good is it? If it is unable to predict what will happen, if we are saying that some personality characteristic is going to predict success on the job, well, what if it really doesn't predict success on the job? If that's the case, then maybe the theory explaining that link really isn't very helpful. It really isn't very useful. So it should explain what is known. It should predict what will happen, and do so, and be tested. Produce testable experiments to essentially to find a link between the theory and the results that follow. You want to be able to predict. Theories are based on multiple sources of information. In other words, it's not just one single study that proves a theory correct. You need to be able to look at multiple sources of information, multiple examples to see this, the predictions of this theory come to play. Another aspect of a good theory is that it is frugal in its assumption. It's parsimonious. In other words, what it means is it has a few clear premises to it. It's not an all-encompassing, this is my theory of life, the universe, and everything. If you read Douglas Adams, you'll get the joke, I guess. But with a good theory, though, really keeps the premises pretty clear, and it's not necessarily trying to explain everything. Has personal and intuitive appeal. It seems to it should at least make some sense, some logical sense. So people, some theories shouldn't just really come out of left field. They should have some connection to reality. It should be interesting. It should be something that's provocative. It shouldn't be something that it's like one of the things. A theory shouldn't be like, well, duh, big deal. Who cares? It should be something that really has some potential for finding out a lot of useful information. Okay, the way this course and the textbook you'll be reading is structured is that there are different perspectives of personality. There's not just one way to look at personality. For example, biological perspectives of personality are different theories of personality that kind of take a biological approach. So within all the different perspectives, you'll have individual theories. You'll have Freud and his psychoanalytic theory. And you'll have different theorists, different researchers who have different theoretical points of view. Okay, so there are individual theories of personality that do attempt to describe what it means to be human. But all of these theories, all the individual theories from the different theorists throughout our history and current theorists today, nevertheless, in many ways can be tied together in certain categories, let's say. So in other words, you can have three personality psychologists from three different universities from different parts of the world who have who are studying different aspects of personality, studying different things, but maybe they all take a biological approach. What is going on in the nervous system? What is going on perhaps with hormones, etc.? So you may have three different theories to try to explain personality, but maybe these three theories are tied together in some way within one theme. So that's what we're talking about, the perspective. So the perspectives that we're going to be talking about in the course, you would call them actually meta-theoretical perspectives. What is a meta-theoretical perspective? Well, a meta-theory is essentially a theory to explain other theories. So the meta-theoretical perspective is like one kind of an umbrella perspective that can be used to more or less help us understand the individual theoretical perspectives underneath that umbrella. There are also going to be plenty of overlap in the different theories. Some of the theories that we'll be discussing have both biological components as well as psychological, situational, and so on. And therefore, there's going to be some overlap. So you might have a particular personality theory that can be grouped into maybe a biological perspective as well as a trait perspective. It's perfectly okay for there to be overlapping connections. Another thing is that the individual theories that could be studied in by a particular research may be very limited in scope, maybe only dealing with personality when it comes to personality in athletics, let's say. And it could be quite intentional to do it that way. Now, personality within athletics really, in terms of my personal life, doesn't really have much relevance. I am not an athlete. But nevertheless, it would be highly relevant for people who are in athletics, maybe professional athletes. And in that case, having an understanding of personality within that limited scope is going to be very useful for those individuals. So here are the traits that are essentially organized in the textbook and the ones we'll be getting to in this course. We've got the trait perspective that looks at stable qualities in people. You have motive perspective, which understands the underlying motives behind what we do. We have the perspective on inheritance and evolution, which talks about the genetic evolutionary base of personality. We have the biological processes perspective, which looks at what is going on within the human body that is having an impact on their behavior. The psychoanalytic perspective, started by Sigmund Freud, looks at the internal forces within our minds, particularly on our unconscious mind that we're not consciously aware of, but that are going on deep within us. And that's what the psychoanalytic perspective focuses on. Psychosocial perspectives, the various theories within that perspective, are looking at how we interact with others, how the social relationships are formed, particularly between parents and children, but also with other people around us, friends and family and so on. Social learning perspectives takes what we've learned from learning theory, Pavlov and Skinner. We'll get to that, obviously, for those people later on. But understanding that personality comes from what the experiences that we go through are, the situations we encounter, how we learn from situations, how we learn from experience. And that's what that particular... So in other words, if we look at someone's personality, it's essentially the sum total of their patterns of how they learn. The humanistic perspective takes the point of view that we all have this natural tendency towards self-perfection, self-actualization, toward becoming the best we can be. And that basically, that is just the way our personality is, that we can either be moving toward this goal, or we can be veering off in the wrong direction. Cognitive perspective on personality studies how we process information in our mind, how we organize the information that we experience. So it deals with memory, it deals with how we react to stimuli, that kind of thing. And this is one way to, and that again, how we think about things, how that is enormous impact on our personality. Finally, the self-regulation perspective kind of takes a systems approach when it comes to studying personality, realizing that our personality is a complex psychological system that has inputs, it has throughputs and outputs, and from these various complex systems, that is how behavior essentially is produced from these complex systems that we have within us. So again, we will go over all of these particular perspectives in this course. Another issue to consider in studying personality is the issue of assessment. It's all very nice to be able to talk about someone's personality, but then again, how do you measure it? How do you determine what some aspects of a person's personality actually are? So assessment is the procedures that we use to try to measure personality in some way, and we need to be able to do this if we want to be able to conduct research and be able to perhaps use a real-world application. Many employers give personality tests to potential employees to see if they would be the right fit for that particular company, that particular job. Another important thing to consider is that a lot of the sometimes people behave dysfunctionally. Sometimes we have personality disorders, for example. And what we understand about personality can help us understand why people may function inadequately, but also can help us understand why people can learn to function better. I mean, it's not, you don't necessarily even need to be undergoing therapy, but there are things that you could learn, for example, to help us perhaps improve our memory or improve our reduce procrastination and so on. So there are various things that personality, the study of personality, can help in helping change behavior for the better. All right. Well, next time we're going to go into the research methods of personality. So please look for that, and you can click on this PowerPoint as well as any of the other PowerPoints posted on Moodle if you wanted to read it over. Thank you.